Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 17, and given the nuances and quirks of the Christmas week schedule, things a little bit different around these parts as we record on a Friday morning with 3 games already in the rearview mirror. Want to wish all of you and yours a very Merry Christmas that has since passed, a Happy Hanukkah, and whatever other holidays you celebrate as we inch closer towards New Year's coming next week. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined by a special NFL insider and professional bettor. You guys know his work all too well, given the fact that he took the reins and broke down those 2 aforementioned Christmas Day games along with the Bears-Seahawks contest earlier this week. And Billy, job well done, my friend. Appreciate you stepping into the seat. You know, when you work with a diva like Payne week in, week out, he takes a trip last weekend into college football country. Here he is demanding a day off, so appreciate you stepping into the hot seat today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always love talking ball with you guys, and I love doing the solo pods every once in a while. It forces me to do a little bit extra work, put in that extra time, and it can always give Payne some shit. So that's always a good thing.
Hey, look, it's the different dynamic that a lot of us have gone through, whether it's through grade school, middle school, high school. When you have an individual project, you got to work a little bit harder than leaning on the sum total of the group, hoping somebody can carry you across the finish line. But lucky for me, this is a group project, so I can lean on you today to try and fill in the gaps and the things that I may have missed in some of the research. Before we get into the 4 games that we have slated to break down, just kind of wanted to get your quick take on what we've seen go down already this week. It was the Kansas City Chiefs finding a level that we've started to see glimpses of in recent weeks as the offense begins to identify who their playmakers are as they're getting healthier. Even without Chris Jones, they're able to find separation against the Steelers. It was a disappointing effort, to say the least, from the Houston Texans. The lone bright spot for those folks in the area was watching Beyonce at halftime in a 31-2 defeat at the hands of the Baltimore Ravens. And then, of course, a game last night between the Bears and Seahawks that may have set football back 50-plus years in inclement weather. The Seahawks winning in a robust offensive showcase to the tune of 6-3, failing to cover as 4.5-point favorites. But any of the X's and O's or things that you noticed through the first 3 games already that you thought were worth highlighting for our listenership?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty apparent that Kansas City's finding its stride. This is just what they do. They kind of get it going as the season goes on. The offense with Worthy really stepping up. We're seeing his reception numbers get bet over, his receiving yards get bet over. I don't know what Pitt was doing on defense. It appears that team has got some stuff going on internally because there's a lot of finger pointing about a couple players maybe doing too much, whether that's Minka Fitzpatrick or Cam Sutton. Someone was not doing their responsibility there, and it left Kansas City with those openings. Look, everything's going to go through Kansas City again. It feels to me like in the AFC, I don't want, this is going to bite me in the ass, but Kansas City, Baltimore, Buffalo feels like that. One of those 3 teams is coming out.
Going on a limb there, taking the top 3 against the field.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm making a big proclamation to watch like the Chargers make a run here or something like that. But you're watching Baltimore in that second game. They're definitely figuring it out on the defensive side, especially that pass defense continues to make massive strides since Kyle Hamilton's return to his true safety spot. The health on that side of the ball is pretty strong. They're likely going to be matched up with the Chargers in round 1, provided, stuff goes according to plan here. As a Bills fan, Baltimore scares the shit out of me. That is a team after this week, I'll see what my kind of the math and my numbers say and what, the little modeling I do says, but I'm going to guess they're probably going to be my highest rated team coming into the playoffs. And it's really tough, not to see why that is, because especially as the weather gets worse, they can lean on the run game. Both the offensive line, defensive line are playing at a high level. I don't know what's going on with Houston. I think obviously the injuries have played a massive impact there, but the defensive performance was just I mean, what'd you think of it? It looked like a very, honestly, poorly coached team, and I'm a fan of D'Amico Ryans. I have not been a fan of Bobby Slowick. Still going to stand on that hill there. That I don't think he's that good. But the D'Amico Ryans defensive performance there was something.
It was definitely troubling, and you figured that Baltimore could have a path to running the football, and that opening drive, in my opinion, spoke volumes. Once you're able to get Derrick Henry on track early, it opens up everything in the playbook that Todd Monken wants to lean into, and the fact that Baltimore was able to win that game going away with Lamar Jackson having 15 pass attempts, no doubt raises some red flags. Look, this is a Houston defense that's a little bit banged up in the defensive backfield. Losing Jimmy Ward for the season definitely hurt. Jalen Petrie can be that extra hat in the box coming downhill, and that's been problematic without him. And against that interior, you've seen in the last couple of weeks, teams are able to run the football between the tackles. Houston offensively, I don't think they're getting this fixed. I mean, maybe I'm going to be wrong, and they'll come out week 18 with a different game plan. They'll look like a reinvigorated side in the wild card. But C.J. Stroud, from a mechanic standpoint, happy feet galore, some easy throws he's got to make. And you wonder if constantly being under duress behind an offensive line that hasn't been able to protect at all is taking its toll. Combine that with the fact that they're down so many weapons in the passing game. It's essentially Nico Collins, Dalton Schultz, John Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson. And, of course, against the Ravens, they weren't able to run the football. I mean, Joe Mixon has fallen on some hard times, looking a lot more like the running back now that we saw in the twilight of his career with the Bengals than the guy who was shot out of a cannon that everyone was lauding for having a career resurgence since he took over as RB1 in Houston earlier this season.
Yeah, 100%. And it just feels, you feel for Houston because it seemed like, they lost Diggs in the season, and then Tank Dell kind of had to step up in that role when they didn't have Diggs or Nico, and he did, and then they got him back. And in that Kansas City game, you start to see, maybe Houston could figure this out on offense. And then they lose a couple of linemen, and it feels like anytime they've gained momentum this season, it's been ripped away. So, it's going to be tough for them to go into, or, probably take on like a Pittsburgh.
I was going to say, the way it's trending right now, we are on a collision course for a Pittsburgh-Houston wildcard weekend game, and it's a question of which falling knife you want to try and catch in that particular matchup.
Yeah, I wonder who closes favorite in that game if Houston continues to perform like they're performing. We'll see. Pittsburgh's got their own issues. I do think Pittsburgh's a little more fixable, though, than what's going on in Houston.
Yep, I would kind of echo those sentiments. You think the Steelers will get a little bit healthier. You have to imagine that Joey Porter will be out there and available for a playoff game to solidify the secondary. And if you can take away Nico Collins, it kind of forces the Texans to play left-handed as far as their passing game is concerned. Before we get into the games themselves, though, just kind of want to pick your brain briefly. I know a lot of our listeners have been with us for more than 700 episodes, and some listeners may be tuning into the Bet the Board podcast for the very first time. How do some of your philosophies change as we get into these games in week 17 and 18 where one team has everything to play for? Some teams are just playing out the stretch, and we had that very scenario play out last night on Thursday Night Football between the Seahawks and Bears, where there's no doubt that the Seahawks number was inflated. It continued to be one-way traffic, and for a game that probably should have been priced 3, Seattle closes 4.5, 5. Credit the Bears. They didn't do much in the way of generating anything offensively, but did enough to get you to the window if you bet them at inflated tag as a short home underdog.
Yeah, I think, the media and fans of these teams believe that, this team's tanking or the effort's going to stink. And I think people forget that these guys are professionals. They're trying to put their best film for their potential next team that they're going to be playing for. Same with the coaches. These coaches want to win football games. It really becomes a battle between the front office and who is actually performing on the field. So when you're watching these teams and these games, and we saw Las Vegas kind of win a game that last week where both those teams are kind of it's better for them long term to lose that game, but these coaches are still fighting to win these games. It's really the general managers and the owners who may be getting in the ear of, hey, maybe we look at this guy in this position here. Let's get some of the young guys out there to play. They're going to play hard. No one's quitting. But is the effort there to maximize the chance of winning? No. It does offer a lot of opportunities in the prop market, especially these last 2 weeks as some of these teams make the transition from we're trying to put out the most optimal team to win right now, and we're looking for the future, so we're going to be getting some of these players a little more time, or if there's a veteran who's injured, he might not be getting as much time as he normally would in a must-win game. And then you look at a lot of these guys are playing for certain incentives, and that usually leaks its way on Twitter. Unfortunately, people love to point that out going into Week 18, and the books adjust. But as in terms of handicapping, it's really, you can't be looking at teams like the Giants and Jacksonville and pricing them like they're in absolute must-win mode. They're trying everything they need to win the football game. You just got to kind of look at it and say, when the guys are on the field, they're going to be playing hard. The guys coaching the special teams, defense, the head coach, they want to win these games. But are they going to be going for it on 4th and 4 in the fourth quarter if they're down 5 to win a game, to take them out of the number 1 spot overall? Like, I'm speaking to the Giants here. I don't think Brian Daboll's doing that, because I think he's smart enough to know if he wants to keep his job, he wants to get that number 1 overall pick. So, it's interesting though. You see the price inflations, and usually it lends to some ugly dogs. But you can usually get a pretty good idea in that first quarter of what teams are playing for and what the game plan is for that game. You'll see some guys playing that maybe surprise you.
And look, let me tell you, we've seen some of those ugly dogs really struggle down the stretch. I mean, one of the chalkiest years that I can remember, I believe it was Action Network that had that number going back to Week 5. If you've blindly bet favorites from an ATS perspective, not factoring in the 3 games we've already seen this week, 56% ATS, Billy. If we all knew it was going to be that easy, it would have made our weeks, created a lot more free time week in, week out, to blindly bet the chalk, take advantage of the better team, and be able to cash those tickets in a variety of exotics and straight bets down the stretch. We'll see if the books are able to get a little bit back over the final 2 weeks of the regular season. So a lot of things to keep in mind as we deep dive some of these football games. You mentioned the player prop market and some of those incentives. We saw something unique unfold in the college football world last night. Harold Fannin, a very talented tight end that'll most likely hone his craft on Sundays in the NFL, had a chance to break some records in the college game, and Bowling Green fed him early. They fed him often, and I don't think I've ever seen a college football over-under prop set at 9.5, juiced to minus 175, and be able to cash that prop by halftime, with Harold Fannin coming down with 17 catches and nearly 170 yards in Bowling Green's loss to Arkansas State. So factor all of those things in. NFL a little bit tougher to feed the horse, but no doubt some contract incentives and some organizations that like to reward their players for some of the things they've been able to outline. This week, though, with the quirky schedule that we have in front of us, a trio of games on Saturday, and as much as we all wanted to deep dive Chargers-Patriots, we figured we'd save you guys the trouble and get right into one of the marquee games Saturday afternoon between the Denver Broncos and the Cincinnati Bengals. Right now, Cincinnati, a 3-point favorite, 3 minus 20, but there are plenty of 3.5s out in the market as well. Total on the game sits at 49.5. Some potential inclement weather in the forecast in Cincinnati for this matchup. The Bengals, they need to win out and get a little bit of help if they're going to find a way to crash the postseason party. Denver, everything in front of them, very much in control of their own destiny. They look to have a winnable game on the surface Week 18 should they drop this game here, knowing that Carson Wentz will probably start for the Chiefs. But Sean Payton and everyone around that Broncos camp has said they'd rather take care of business earlier rather than later. You look at the Broncos so far this season, Billy, 7-0 against teams with a winning percentage of 500 or worse, just 2-6 against teams with a winning record. This would be their first postseason appearance as a franchise since 2015, when they ended up going on to win the Super Bowl behind one of the more talented defenses we have seen. It's the second longest active playoff drought in the NFL for Denver, in front of just the new, easy for me to say on a Friday. Second longest playoff drought, just behind the Jets, who have not played meaningful postseason football since 2010. As far as the Broncos last time out, came up 34-27 losers against the Los Angeles Chargers. Did have a double-digit lead late in the first half before things swung on that free kick. Meanwhile, for the Cincinnati Bengals, they would be eliminated from the postseason with a loss. Would be their second consecutive missed postseason after trips to the AFC Championship in both 2021 and 2022. They have struggled against winning teams all season, but it hasn't been because of Joe Burrow's performance. Under normal circumstances, he would very much be in the thick of things rankings as far as MVP consideration. This Denver offense, it tries to run through the ground game, but it hasn't exactly been able to do so in recent weeks. You look at some of Bo Nix's underlying numbers. He has struggled the last couple of weeks with turnovers, something that probably gives Sean Payton nightmares, knowing he'd like his quarterback to be more of a game manager than anything else. But he gets the luxury of taking on a Cincinnati defense that leaves an awful lot to be desired when they step up in class. But, Billy, there's no doubt in my mind the matchup people want to watch will be Joe Burrow on the offensive side against a Broncos defense. Should be a little bit healthier with the return of Riley Moss opposite Patrick Surtain. But is there one particular matchup that you're looking at in this game that you think will determine this side or total Saturday afternoon from Cincinnati?
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up, obviously the way Cincinnati's going to win this game is they pass the ball. They got, Burrow and Chase and Higgins, who are clearly just an amazing trio of players. Even though something to monitor here, Higgins is questionable, or he hasn't been practicing, and there's a thought that he should go, but maybe he's a little more dinged up than we thought. On the other side of the ball here, Denver's last 4 weeks, they are 7th in pass EPA defense, and they are 4th in rush EPA defense. They're actually first in stuffing the run, first in success rate rush defense. So even though it didn't look great against the Chargers and Herbert was kind of able to sling it, Denver's been pretty good, and they've been doing that without Riley Moss, who's returning for this one. And what's interesting about this is the Broncos brought an extra rusher 26.1% of the time between weeks 1 through 12 when Riley Moss was on the field, which was the highest rate in the league they brought pressure. When he was off the field, that dropped to 18% the last 2 games, which was only 13th in bringing that extra rush pressure. So I think, Jamar Chase, 36.3% of his targets have come from the slot. Sean Payton did talk about maybe having Surtain follow him a little bit more for this game. It's basically playoff time for both these teams. It's not time to figure out if your slot defender can cover Jamar Chase. Do I think Surtain's just going to follow him around the field all day? No. But we have some bad weather. We have some potential rain here. Denver gets great pressure. They are 4th in pass rush win rate. Cincy's O-line's a little banged up. It looks like Amarius Mims missed practice yesterday, even though Orlando Brown's going to be back. Can Cincinnati run the ball against Denver is another question I have, especially if the weather's not great. Neither one of these offenses has really played a daunting schedule. Both have faced bottom 8 opposing defenses. Denver's health is getting much better. It feels to me like in this game it's Joe Burrow versus the world, which is kind of how it's been for Cincinnati. But, Todd, we talked a little bit before the show just about this Denver team, and the coaching advantage goes to Denver. The O-line play goes to Denver. The D-line play goes to Denver. The secondary goes to Denver. So the question is, can Joe Burrow be Superman again?
It's one of those questions. I mean, Bengals fans have to be as frustrated as any fan base in the league when you watch Joe Burrow go out there and continue to put up these gaudy numbers on a week-in, week-out basis. I mean, he's thrown 24 touchdowns in his last 7 games. That's more than Mahomes had thrown the entire season coming into Week 17. I mean, he's on an NFL record streak, Billy, of 7 consecutive games with 250-plus passing yards and 3 touchdowns. His 9 games this season put him 1 away from being the 4th quarterback in NFL history to have 10 games of being able to do that. He would join Tom Brady in 2007, Peyton Manning in 2013, and Patrick Mahomes in 2018 to be able to accomplish those feats. The difference for Joe Burrow, he's not in the MVP consideration like those 3 all went on to win. He's fighting for their postseason lives. It just speaks to what Cincinnati isn't bringing on the defensive side on a weekly basis.
Yeah, and we didn't, the unfortunate thing is we didn't learn much last week against Cleveland. We saw the opening run from Ford, but then, they faced DTR. And I'm not here to slander any of these guys or, put them down too much, but DTR is not an NFL starting quarterback. He can't push the ball down the field. His decision-making is questionable at best. And so, yeah, the metrics look good last week for the Cincinnati defense, but this is a different beast. Sean Payton, all due respect to Kevin Stefanski because he is a great coach, but he just has such little to work with. Sean Payton, I have a lot of faith in. I think the Cincinnati defense especially has struggled all year with tackling. And Denver's got some interesting pieces on that team. Marvin Mims, Audric Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin, guys who can actually break tackles, even though that Denver run game hasn't been great all year. Since he's finished 26th this year in run-stop win rate, they give up 4.8 yards per rush on first down, which is 19th in the league. And Todd, they only have 46 run stops, tackles for 0 or negative yards on the year on first and second down, which is 28th in the league right now. So they're just not getting to the ball carrier behind the line of scrimmage. If you did your reading this week, Denver talked about getting out of these 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7s. They want to make that a shorter distance. So I think we're going to see them at least attempt to run the ball early, especially if the weather's bad with the rain. If they have success there, it just feels like they can maybe drain this clock a little bit, keep Joe Burrow off the field, and get this ball down the field enough that they could put pressure on Cincinnati to kind of play catch-up.
It's an interesting game. I mean, look, the Cincinnati Bengals have been one of the more, I don't know if I want to say overvalued commodities, but over the last couple of weeks continue to take money, whether it was against the Browns and DTR a week ago. You know, you even saw them on the road against the Tennessee Titans taking money, a game that they won by 10 points, but they continue to struggle and they step up in class. And for me, the hardest game for me to get out of my head as it pertains to the Bengals season with all those blown losses or blown opportunities to try and build up their resume was the 44-38 loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers coming out of the bye when they had everything in the world to play for.
I mean, the defense was atrocious. And it's not like Pittsburgh has this dynamic offense where, you know, they can just explode on you all the time. It just felt like Cincy was just off. And it feels like Cincy's been off. You know, Sheldon Rankins, I don't know what mysterious illness he's had, but he's been on every injury report for the last 4 weeks for just illness. They're just struggling to stop the run. There seems to be problems in the secondary at times. Like Cam Taylor-Britt will have games that he looks like maybe a CB1, and then other games where he's just lost. He's just getting burned. Since it's just the problem is the inconsistency with this team, and you're asking them to lay a number trending towards north of 3, which is where we're at against a playoff team who's better in the trenches. And it's just, what do you expect to get from this defense? It's just flip a coin. It's flip a coin, and you're flipping a coin and you're laying juice to do it.
Exactly. It is a great point. And look, you could be honest, Billy. I mean, you being a Bills fan, you'd love nothing more than to see Cincinnati's playoffs hopes dashed rather than having Joe Burrow on this particular heater head to Western New York for Wild Card Weekend to take on the Buffalo Bills. So you can say the unspoken part out loud if so inclined.
My pocketbook would have loved Cincinnati to make a run here and make
you and me both.
Make the playoffs. But God, as a Bills fan, can you imagine we get the two after the year we have, and then freaking Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins come trotting in? I mean, no, especially with the current situation of our secondary, that would be a nightmare scenario.
I was going to say they may not be able to set a total high enough unless there was lake effect snow that came into the fold in terms of handicapping that particular element. But the Bengals, plenty of work to do if they are going to find an improbable path to being the 7th seed in the AFC. Their odds have drifted as high, not right now, but a couple weeks ago, 350-1 to take home the Lombardi Trophy and 15-1 to make the playoffs. I have much shorter numbers on both of those scenarios than were what was out there when it looked to be an impossibility. From Saturday afternoon into Saturday night, though, a game that, look, Arizona mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, but they would love to play spoiler against a divisional foe. It's the Cardinals at SoFi Stadium against the Rams. The Rams now out to a 6.5-point favorite. Total pretty much across the board, 48. There are some smatterings of 47.5. Arizona won the previous matchup way back in week 2, dismantling the Rams to the tune of 41-10. In that first round matchup between these teams, the Rams played without Puka Nacua. They lost Cooper Kupp during the game in the first half and were banged up along the offensive line. Things have changed quite a bit going into the rematch here. The Cardinals also sacked Matthew Stafford 5 times in their first meeting. Arizona, though, after being eliminated, Jonathan Gannon has said all the right things. I love that we're going to go play 2 games. You have 2 more opportunities. It's obviously not the outcome we wanted. We're not going to be playing in mid-January, but I'm excited for these 2 opportunities to close out the season. Meanwhile, on the flip side of things, this is a Rams team that has a simpler and more straightforward path to getting there even with a loss, they still would control their own destiny in the regular season finale. I'm not going to get in all the strength of victory metrics if the Rams are able to just get a straight-up win against the Arizona Cardinals. It's way above my pay grade. But this is a Rams team over the last 10 games that's gone 8-2 straight up after starting the season 1-4, looking to be the first team in NFL history with 2 straight playoff appearances after being 3 games under 500 at any point during the season. But the one thing we have seen, Billy, there are 2 head coaches, and we'll get to one of them a little bit later in the show, that elevate the overall level of performance for their teams the deeper we get into the football calendar, and Sean McVay being one of them. 25-11 straight up as a head coach during the month of December, 25-10-1 against the number when it matters most. And if we shorten that sample size going all the way back to just December of 2021, 14-3 straight up during that span, and a robust 15-2 against the number. Arizona, injury concerns along the offensive line. Paris Johnson and Jonah Williams lost for the season, so the Cardinals will be playing without both first-team tackles in this spot. James Conner on the injury report wasn't able to finish last week in their loss against Carolina. We'll see about his availability for this particular game. And with this Rams team, you go through the injury report. All signs point to them being as healthy as they've been. Rob Havenstein did pop up. It would get limited on Thursday. But again, we mentioned motivation playing a role. Arizona looking to try and perform the role of spoiler as nearly a touchdown underdog. But Billy, is there a path for Arizona either on the offensive or defensive side to gain an edge against a Rams team that's looked a little bit pedestrian offensively over the last 2 weeks, but appears to be rounding into form, especially as a stop unit?
I think if Arizona is going to be able to hang in this game, it's going to have to be on that defensive side of the ball. You mentioned their offensive line, it's a little bit of a mess. And while the Rams D-line, the season-long metrics have not shown to be that great, last 4 weeks, they're 10th in rush EPA defense, 8th in rush success rate defense, so they're kind of stepping up in that run game. If you listen to, opposing quarterbacks, even Rodgers was talking about it, he said these young guys on that Rams D-line are different, and basically was lauding them for their performance against his offensive line. It's going to be tough for me to see Arizona without a good, strong run game having a ton of offensive success. You mentioned the total kind of being touched with at 48, bet down to 47.5. I think if you're Arizona, the way you win this game is you're going to have to stuff the run as best you can, which is I don't know that they can do that. When we look at that first game, it was a blowout, right? Arizona wiped the floor with them in week 2. But, man, that Rams offensive line was so beat up. They were coming off the Sunday Night Football game against Detroit. Detroit is the team this year that seems to be the week after you play Detroit, you tend to lose the games or not cover the spread because of the physicality of those games. So kind of threw that game out. I don't think Puka played in that game either. It's tough, right? These are one of the games we talked about in the beginning of the show where Arizona's got nothing to play for in terms of playoff potential. The number, to me, is factoring that in a bit. But when you're looking at the matchup, you're like, what is Arizona going to do on the offensive end if they can't run the football with James Conner? And now you're putting your faith in an Arizona defense to take down and cover Kupp and Nakua and Demarcus Robinson and Tutu and Kyron out of the backfield, Kyron up the middle. It feels like a tall task, and that's kind of why this number is as high as it is. We'll say this, so every time it seems to touch 7, there's resistance there, which I agree with. But if James Conner doesn't play, I can't get there with Arizona if he's not out there.
When you're assessing the Rams, and given what we've seen from them offensively, I know it was back-to-back road games. They had a little bit of weather they had to contend with in San Francisco, and we know how hotly contested those games are in the division. Last week, Matthew Stafford, underwhelming to say the least. Putting together a second straight performance with less than 160 passing yards. Is this all about Kyron Williams? Do the Rams just decide, hey, the hell with it, we're going to try and recreate what Carolina was able to do with Chuba Hubbard a week ago, and Kyron's going to tote the rock 25 to 30 times, operate off of play action, and try and get Puka involved, given that the Cardinals have done a good job against some of the secondary options, specifically in the slot and with their secondary, but have really struggled with true number ones, creating a path for Puka to have a big, big day.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I was doing some reading this morning about this game. And the Rams did not shy away from talking about their usage of Kyren Williams. They basically said, this guy's on fire. He's rushed for over 100 yards 3 of the last 4 games. We will keep feeding him as long as he can handle it. They talk about him being one of the toughest dudes. Also, don't sleep on Blake Corum. Blake Corum has been effective in the limited role he's gotten. So if for some reason Kyren Williams gets banged up, he does tend to get banged up a little bit, or they give him a breather or two, Blake Corum can definitely run the football here and run it with success against this Arizona front. I think you're right about the number ones. Cooper Kupp has clearly lost a step. If you've watched him throughout the season, he's not the same guy he was, and that's not really surprising. He's had some injuries, and he just looks a step slower, but I'm not sure what Arizona can do to answer for Puka. And then you factor in Tyler Higbee's going to be back this week. Not saying he's a big game changer, but it really does feel like the Rams are they're so healthy, and this is the time that they kind of get going. I don't know if Arizona can get enough stops to win this game.
Be great for drama, but for football fans, of course, unless you root for the Rams. But I think I'm kind of with you there that it's a big ask for Arizona, not to necessarily cover as 6.5-point dogs, but to go out there and get this win straight up on the field.
Yeah, I think it would take some turnovers, honestly. And I'm not saying Arizona can't. Budda Baker is the game wrecker. You watch that guy play, you see his numbers. He's a guy who can force fumbles. And so if you told me after Sunday morning that Arizona won this game and they were +3 in the turnover margin because of either a Stafford errant throw or maybe a Kyren Williams fumble, it wouldn't surprise me. It just feels like that's what it's going to take for Arizona to actually win this football game with the state of their offensive line right now, with the state of James Conner. Kyler Murray, I think we've seen him mature a little bit. He's officially been eliminated. Are we going to see maybe a little step back in preparation for him? There's been rumors about that throughout his career. So these are things you're kind of wondering now. It's like, all right, he made a throw last week against Carolina that was just kind of just a brain-dead decision, and we're seeing more and more of that as teams are able to get pressure on him. He's kind of been faltering, and he does this kind of late in the year, right? It seems like the book gets out on him. He plays great football. He's got a different coordinator, and things are working, and then late season football, just the same production's not there. So it's tough for me to want to get to the window with Arizona, but at the same time, my numbers show value to Arizona. It's just the matchup's not great. It's not great for this match for this one for the Cardinals.
Hey, credit to Kyler Murray. You mentioned how his play has fallen off a little bit. At least he's healthy out there for a Week 17 game, something we haven't grown accustomed to from the diminutive man under center. So he's been a little bit smarter with his decision-making there. Did have 8 carries for more than 60 yards against Carolina, but not absorbing some of the same volume of hits that we've grown accustomed to in the past. So fun game Saturday night, familiar foes. The Rams looking to do everything they can to get one step closer towards securing the NFC West and making a legitimate case for being a team that nobody wants to see in the NFC playoff picture as they get healthier, trending in the right direction, while a number of the contenders deal with injuries to key players on both sides of the ball. You can follow Billy on social media, and I know a lot of our listeners already do. Billy, given your mentions when it comes to some of the prop offerings throughout the course of the season, at Watt_05. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, though, as always, for all things Bet the Board, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. We tweeted out the updated holiday schedule. We'll be back with you on Monday breaking down the Lions and 49ers, but instead of recapping everything that we saw in Week 17 and previewing some of the look-ahead lines that we know will be volatile given player availability or lack thereof, we're going to cover all 4 of the college football playoff quarterfinal games. So Brad Powers will be with us, so should be a busy show. Make sure to mark those calendars on Monday, as we know some of those New Year's Eve festivities get in the way come Tuesday and Wednesday. On to the Sunday slate and a couple of marquee games. So we'll go to the late afternoon. And I was going through the schedule, Billy, and given the fact that 6 games are already going to be played, not a whole lot in the way of watchable football as far as the late afternoon is concerned. But all eyes in the NFC will be on Green Bay and Minnesota. Depending on where you look, Green Bay, a 1-point favorite. Depending on other shops, we are seeing the Minnesota Vikings, a 1-point home favorite, but the total, more or less, 48.5, widely available. the 129th meeting between these border mates and the Green Bay Packers. They come in with an 11-4 record, clinched a playoff berth on Monday Night Football with a 34-0 win versus the Saints. It's the 5th playoff appearance in the last 6 seasons, all under head coach Matt LaFleur. For the Vikings, they control their own destiny for a 1 seed potentially. They're going to need to win these next couple of games. They would love a Lions loss, and things can get a little bit squirrely. But if the Vikings beat the Packers on Sunday, it makes the Lions game against the 49ers on Monday somewhat meaningless, as the two teams will play not just for the division title, but also that number 1 overall seed. The 13 wins this season for the Vikings, tied for the second most wins in a season in franchise history. It's the second 13-win season for Kevin O'Connell, accomplished the first one back in 2022. This team, though, they've been outstanding in close games, going 8-1 in one-score contests this season, a 25-9 record in one-score games under head coach KOC. Green Bay, point spread darlings, 4-0-1 against the number over their last 5 games. Matt LaFleur, outstanding during the month of December, much like Matt LaFleur from a straight-up perspective and ATS-wise. LaFleur even better when he's got a little bit of revenge. 27-11 straight up in that role, 25-13 against the number. But the Vikings, they have been point spread darlings not just in recent weeks, but all season long. 10-4-1 against the number, tied for the best mark in the NFL. They'll be favored for their 12th straight game, second longest active streak in the NFL. And Billy, looking at these two teams, Green Bay going to be a little bit dinged up for this contest. We're working under the expectation that Christian Watson won't be available in the passing attack. Jair Alexander logged full practices all last week, was downgraded before kickoff against the Saints, and Matt LaFleur indicated that he wasn't much more optimistic that the talented, when healthy, cornerback can be of the lockdown variety. You would have loved to see that matchup against Justin Jefferson. For Minnesota, I mean, their injury report about as clean as it can be at this juncture of the season. High level of familiarity between these teams. Green Bay has played a little bit more difficult schedule of late, but hard to argue with what the Minnesota Vikings have done, getting the most out of key contributors that were cast off in previous destinations. Should be a fascinating matchup come Sunday. Which side of the ball do you have your eyes on in terms of determining who gets out of U.S. Bank Stadium with a victory Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with when Green Bay's got the ball in offense. I think when we evaluate Minnesota as a whole, for the year they've been really stout against the defense. I mean, against the opposing rushing attacks. They're second in rush defense EPA and third in rush defense success rate. But they've trended poorly over the last 4 weeks against Seattle, Chicago, Atlanta, and Arizona. Teams that don't really have these like strong running attacks. Minnesota's only been 24th in rush success rate defense. And in comes in Green Bay, who, you know, the run game with Jacobs has been a force. They're 7th in rush EPA offense, 3rd in rush success rate defense. 3rd in rush success rate offense the last 4 weeks. And for the year, Green Bay's faced the second toughest strength of schedule for opposing defenses. Jordan Love is 2nd in completion percentage over expectation and EPA blend over the last 4 weeks. So you're kind of seeing Green Bay really hit this late season form on offense. Lone concern, you talked about the injury report. Elton Jenkins popped up there as a DNP on Thursday. That's something to watch against a very talented Minnesota edge pressure defensive line. Todd, I can't wait for this game because we talked about the AFC and about the teams that we expect to come out of there. Big shocker, seeds 1 through 3 seem to be the most powerful teams at this point. The NFC, I just feel differently. I feel when you look at the coaching, I think in this game particularly, LaFleur and Halfley versus KOC and Flores, you're talking about some of the best coaching in football. I think when you look at the Rams, you got McVay over there, who's a great coach. So the NFC, I feel differently. I feel like there's a lot of options of teams that can come out of there, especially with the injuries for Detroit. But when it comes to this one, I'm really interested to see if Vikings can stop the run, especially what we've seen over the last 4 weeks. Because if they can't, then that play action with Jordan Love really opens up with Dobbs and Jaden Reed. And Christian Watson is a big loss just because of his ability to go down the field and put pressure on opposing safeties. But I still like Tucker Kraft, Dontavian Wicks. Green Bay just has a bunch of answers on that side of the football. And that's why we see this number where it is, right? We see it kind of trending towards Green Bay -1, even in Minnesota. most people will look at this game and be like, that's Minnesota's got one of the best home field advantages. Why is this number trending that way? I think if you put gun to head in terms of which of these two teams is more likely to be a little fraudulent, it would be Minnesota.
Assessing Minnesota's defense, honestly, for me, Billy, has been the real challenge. And it's nothing to take away from Brian Flores and what he's been able to accomplish. I mean, Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel have put together phenomenal seasons. You go through the list of opponents that the Vikings have faced since the start of November, and here's where these teams rank in terms of overall total offensive performance. It's the Indianapolis Colts. They played that game with Joe Flacco. The Colts check in at 20th on offense. I mean, just last week, Anthony Richardson threw 11 times in a win against the Tennessee Titans. It's the Jacksonville Jaguars, 26th in the league. The Tennessee Titans, 27th. They played the Bears twice, who ranked 31st. And anyone who watched the Bears on Thursday night against the Seahawks understands some of their shortcomings. It was the Arizona Cardinals. They come in at 11th, but the Cardinals finished just 1 of 6 in the red zone, were able to move the football, just kicked way too many field goals as a 3.5-point dog came up short in that contest. Atlanta, season-long-wise, top 10 offense, but Kirk Cousins was at the end of his rope, and that game was tied at 21, headed into the fourth quarter, so it wasn't as if Minnesota had created separation. And then it was Seattle last week who checks in at 14th, but Geno Smith, a shell of himself right now. And it was a game where the Vikings defense surrendered 23 first downs and 361 yards against the same team that the Bears just bottled up. So a lot of questions for me as it pertains to Minnesota defensively and how they'll defend Green Bay. You talked about some of the pass catchers that were there, and you have to think somewhere Jaden Reed is going to start contributing again. We know he's put together some gaudy numbers in the past against the Vikings. They'd love nothing more with Christian Watson being down to be able to get him back involved in the fold. But on the other side of the ball, you'd have to think that there is a path to success for the Vikings as they've ramped up the passing. Throw against this Green Bay secondary, and chunk yardage and big plays are there for the taking, especially when you have players as talented in the receiving room as what Minnesota does with Sam Darnold performing at a high level.
100%. And we've seen this Green Bay defense improve with Hafley at defensive coordinator, but it's mostly been Todd, the ability to stop the run, especially down the stretch. Green Bay's defense is second in rush EPA defense and third in rush success rate defense. They're overall for the season 5th in run stop win rate. Rashawn Gary's the number 2 edge player against the run according to ESPN's win rate metrics. Obviously getting Edgerrin Cooper back has been huge. He is a stud. Chris Collinsworth could not stop talking about him in that game versus Seattle on Sunday Night Football. But you mentioned it. This pass defense can be had. And Minnesota seems to be more along the lines of they're willing to trust Sam Darnold to push the ball down the field. Jordan Addison has been fantastic. I mean, especially when you consider what was going on with him at the beginning of the season, some of the off-the-field stuff, there was a lot of concern there. But with Jefferson, with Addison, with even Naylor in spots, and then you see Hawkinson's back there, it feels like Minnesota can have success through the air, but I do believe Green Bay's defense may have the ability to make them one-dimensional, which makes throwing the football that much harder. So I'm just excited, man. I think these are some of the best minds in football in this game. I think obviously it's a huge game. Both teams are already in the playoffs. But can Sam Darnold, which quarterback's going to avoid the big mistake? Because Jordan Love has shown that he's been playing great as of late, but sometimes he puts the ball in situations he shouldn't, and Minnesota's part of their great numbers on defense are because of their ability to turn you over. And then Sam Darnold, if Green Bay can get some pressure on him, can he make that big mistake that defense will need in the pass game? So it's a fascinating matchup, man. And I think the number's telling you a story about kind of where the market thinks, what the market thinks of these two teams. I really think the way Green Bay has been trending, there's a push for Green Bay in the market, and it makes a ton of sense.
When you assess these two teams big picture-wise, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, and I'm sure Vikings fans are already making their plans to get down to Bourbon Street and celebrate New Orleans if their team can do the unthinkable. But a higher ceiling for Green Bay, given everything you've seen so far, than the Minnesota Vikings?
Provided they get some health back in that defensive secondary, yes. I think they've been there, done that, especially Jordan Love has, and I really like LaFleur. I think that offensive line is solid, and the defense under Hafley's gotten that much better. I just think they match up better when you're talking about Philadelphia, going up against Philadelphia, I think Green Bay is going to have some answers for them on the offensive end. Same thing with Detroit. I think, Green Bay should have won that game, that second game. And I just, do they have enough to go to the Super Bowl? Yes. Can they do it on the road throughout the playoffs is going to be their biggest challenge, because it looks like, opening game, they probably are going to have to go and take on probably the Rams if the Rams can finish off that division. And then you got to go, you go Rams, you either go 1 seed Detroit, and then maybe you finish up with Philadelphia. It's such a tough path when you have to go on the road 3 times. But if there is a team in the NFC that I believe can do that out of these two, it would be Green Bay.
That's a great point, and all things that you want to factor into the calculus. And going back to a point you made towards the top, where it looks to have a clear delineation of the haves and have-nots in the AFC. The NFC, no doubt, feels a little bit more wide open as we see the questions swirl around the health and status of Jalen Hurts. Don't think it's going to impact anything for him for the playoffs, but we know about the Detroit Lions, who feel like they have 52 players on IR in some capacity, with 97% of those guys being on the defensive side of the ball, and just the number of questions that still need to be answered as far as the NFC and who becomes the team to beat en route to winning the conference. Speaking of the conference, a game that will have major ramifications in the NFC pecking order, the Atlanta Falcons, led by rookie quarterback Michael Penix, go on the road in prime time to the nation's capital to take on the Washington Commanders. And it's Washington, a 4-point favorite across the board, total on the game 47.5. And we are expecting some of that wet stuff to be falling under the bright lights of the nation's capital. This will actually mark the first primetime game between 2 rookie quarterbacks, both selected in the first round of the draft. That nugget via Sunday Night Football's social media account found that a little bit eye-opening, but I guess it's rare to see the NFL give the largest spotlight to 2 rookies, especially those drafted in the first round, typically associated with bad football teams. The Falcons, they're looking for their first division title since 2016 and their first playoff appearance since 2017. Win this week and win their regular season finale, they would be division champions, even if Tampa were to win its remaining 2 games by virtue of the season-long sweep against their division rival. Michael Penix trying to overcome the odds a bit. Quarterbacks within their first 2 starts playing in night games since 2021, just 4-16 straight up. Commanders on the other side, they put their first 10-win season on the books since 2012. The win over the Eagles did make some history last Sunday, snapping Washington's 98-game losing streak, being down 13-plus points in the fourth quarter. First win since beating Dallas in a similar scenario back in 2005. The Commanders, however, did turn it over 5 times and trailed by 14-plus points last week and went on to win. Teams in that spot were just 3-201 straight up over the last 20 years, covered just 6 of those games. So a little bit of history that the Commanders were able to defy, largely led by their rookie quarterback and some dynamic playmaking as much with his legs as we've seen with his arm. But Billy, I'll start with you, the rookie that has a little less tread on his tire, only having 1 start under his belt, that, of course, being Michael Penix. What did you see last week against a much-maligned Giants defense that leads you to believe that he can carry some of that momentum forward, or it was way too vanilla a game plan to take anything from it, knowing he's stepping up in class against a Dan Quinn defense with a lot more at stake this weekend?
Yeah, I think both things can be true. It's tough to take a lot from that game, but I think we could see he's definitely an upgrade over what Kirk Cousins is or was at this point. And that's a tough pill to swallow because Cousins was playing good football at the beginning of the year, but something's gone on, whether it's his health, whether it's not being able to push off, his processing. Penix is definitely an upgrade there. His just presence in the pocket, his arm strength, his decision-making were all positive compared to Kirk. There's zero doubt to me that Dan Quinn's going to try and make his life hell come Sunday night. Washington is 8th in defensive pressure percentage and 10th in sacks. They're 11th in adjusted sack rate. Atlanta's got a good enough O-line. They're 10th in defensive pressure percentage allowed, so they can match with them there. It's a big spot, but if you listen to guys like Darnell Mooney and Bijan Robinson, they have a lot of faith in Penix. They believe Penix is built for these moments. So I'm not that concerned with, is Penix going to be the reason they win or lose this game? I think if they can get the run game going a little bit, which is going to be tough, we'll talk about that, but I think he can settle in here. The market the 5s and the 4.5s have kind of been bought up here. It doesn't mean that that's the final move. But I think that there's an underlying confidence in Michael Penix that just the team did not have with Kirk Cousins. And it's going to be a tough test here because when you look at what Washington has done on the defensive side, they've really tightened up their run defense. Obviously, last week Saquon went nuclear in that first half, but they bottled him up after that. Overall, the last 4 weeks, they're 4th in rush success rate defense, 11th in rush defense EPA. And that is kind of where Atlanta wants to live, is getting Bijan and Algier going. If Washington can stop that and force Penix to throw from the pocket, I think Penix can have success, but it just makes it that much tougher on him, especially if Lattimore is going to be able to go. That's a big question, though.
That seems to be a big question every week with
Marshawn
Lattimore. It doesn't matter if he's wearing a Commanders jersey or a New Orleans Saints jersey over the last handful of years.
It's when you see a guy, not be able to play for 4 weeks because of a hamstring, then he has to leave a game because of said hamstring. It's tough. And Drake London said he's fine. He's going to play. Darnell Mooney has been outstanding. I think he only needs about 40 or 45 yards to reach that 1,000-yard mark this year. He's been outstanding as that wide receiver number 2. The number's interesting, right? Because it feels like these teams are pretty evenly priced from a power rating standpoint, and one of these teams is getting 4 to 4.5. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's only Michael Penix's second start, which does make some sense, and I think Dan Quinn's going to make his life a little difficult. Looks like Jonathan Allen might come back for Washington. He got in his second full practice since coming off IR off that pec tear. That would be a big get for that defense, but I'm not that concerned about this. Penix second start. Cousins has the experience. I think Cousins was playing such bad football at the point that Penix got the win under his belt. He got to look at live bullets. This is going to be different, but I think he can rise to the occasion here.
I was going to ask, what kind of adjustments have you made to the Atlanta Falcons' overall power rating, given the fact that it wasn't Kirk Cousins at the top of his game? I mean, do you keep them flat when they made the change from Cousins to Penix?
No.
Did you even make a slight upgrade, knowing that Penix's ceiling is going to be higher than Cousins is currently constructed, despite having the inexperience working against him?
I bumped them about a point in my power ratings, which was, I think many pros would probably feel like that's a little aggressive. But based on what we were seeing from Kirk, especially like over the 4 to 5 week span, I mean, he was playing like a bottom 5 quarterback. I cannot get out of my mind that Chargers game. And I don't know if I was starting to wonder, like, mentally what is going on with him, if he maybe got a concussion or I rewatched that game. I was like, did he get hit in the head? The decision making in that Chargers loss that's the worst decision making we've seen all year from a quarterback. So to me, it didn't seem like it was getting any better versus Minnesota. He had his moments, but then you watch that Vegas game, he could barely move in the pocket. And so I thought it was justified to bump at least a point off the bat going to Penix, especially when the maturity, he's an older guy. He just looks in the pocket. He looks strong. He's got the ability to move, and he's got that arm strength that Cousins just did not seem to have. So I thought a bump was necessary.
It makes a world of sense for sure when you try and assess some of the Falcons' weaponry and how they were more or less holstered, with Kirk Cousins looking like he had a pea shooter for an arm instead of the kind of quarterback that they had given, a 9-figure deal to, hoping he could stabilize the position before he handed the baton off to a quarterback that they used the 8th overall pick on in the draft. Real quick on the other side of the ball, Atlanta's defense clearly doesn't do a whole lot, and when it comes to being able to get after the opposing quarterback, we know where their sack rate ranks. Jaden Daniels has looked healthier and looked to be a more willing runner as that rib injury has healed up. But is there anything on that side that you think is worth watching when Washington has the ball against Raheem Morris's defense?
So I was looking, and as of late, weeks 13 through 16, the last 4 weeks, Atlanta's been number 1 in EPA per play on defense. You got to factor in, they played the Giants, they played the Raiders, they played Minnesota, and then they played the Chargers. So obviously, strength of schedule of those Giants in Vegas is going to skew those numbers quite a bit. When you look at the Minnesota game, they were actually the second worst defense of week 14 in EPA per play. But we have seen some improvement there. We have seen some improvement on the defensive line. They brought in Emory Jones this week to give them like a watered-down version of Jaden Daniels to practice against.
Look,
I'm
Emery
not sure
does
how
a
much
tremendous
that's going to help.
he does a tremendous job as well throwing to players wearing the wrong colored jersey, so I'm sure the secondary will be brimming with confidence if Emery is doing what he did at multiple stops along the way in college too.
100%. And I guess on this side of the ball, one of the pleasant surprises of this whole year has been Washington's offensive line. They've been able to run the football. They're 8th in pass block win rate. They're 1st for the season in run block win rate. They're 8th in running back yards per carry, which does not include Jaden Daniels. So if you include Jaden Daniels in there, they're one of the top running teams in football. They're 3rd in power success rate, which is basically the percent of time on 3rd and 4th downs where they need 2 yards or less. They're 3rd in the league at getting that 2 yards. So this has really been one of the pleasant surprises. I'm not sure that I trust Atlanta's defense to consistently win in the run game. But I do have faith that Raheem Morris is not going to sit back and just let Jaden Daniels run all over him. He does have some athletic linebackers. Not saying that those linebackers can match up with Jaden Daniels in a race to the sideline, but I think his plan's got to be to make Jaden just sit in the pocket and try and beat him with this wide receiver weapons. We see De'Ami Brown did not practice yesterday. Terry McLaurin popped on the injury report with an ankle. He's going to play, but Raheem Morris has some talent in that secondary, especially in the safety position, to potentially cause some problems here. The big question for me is whether or not Atlanta can consistently stop the run.
It's one of the questions that I think we're all going to be paying attention to for a game that should be a fascinating watch. The face of their respective franchises there, with Jaden Daniels pretty much salting away his Rookie of the Year campaign, and Michael Penix trying to put the Atlanta Falcons on his back, get them to the playoffs, but does have a few more weapons at his disposal. With Bijan Robinson, Drake London, who you mentioned will be healthy despite appearing on the injury report, and a bevy of other playmakers that are more than capable of making a splash. One thing to keep in mind when you're handicapping this Falcons-Commanders game, do check the weather forecast. Like we said at the top, could have some of that wet stuff coming down come Sunday night under the bright lights. Again, you can follow Billy on social media at Watt_05. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And you know what? If you're so inclined, you can follow Payne. He'll be back with us on Monday as well at Payne Insider. And Billy, best bet portion of the program. We've kicked around a number of possibilities. If our listeners only knew the deliberations that we go through to try and arrive at a best bet, even one that's produced a record so far this season that would have us on the clock for the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. It's water under the bridge at this point as we continue to build a little bit of momentum, or try to, coming down the stretch. What have you identified as a potential best bet option for this weekend's truncated NFL slate with 3 games already in the books?
Yeah, I think we just went to it. I think it's the game we just talked about, which is Washington-Atlanta. I think it makes a lot of sense to grab the 4.5s that are out there on Atlanta. Even 4s. We're seeing some of the sharper shops. I'm not going to mention them by name, but they're on the screen. If you do this for a living, you know which shops I'm talking about. Where they're dealing soft 4 now. We saw the 4.5s most of the 4.5s get gobbled up. There's still some out there, but when it comes to this game, it's the power rating just does not get there, and I don't see a big matchup advantage for Washington that would dictate them overriding the power rating number that at least I have, and some of the pros I talk to have on this game, where you're talking about getting out to 4.5 points. I think that there's this number is factoring in that this is like, okay, this is a huge step up for Michael Penix, and it is a step up for Michael Penix, but it's also a step up for Jaden Daniels. This is a monster game for both these teams to, obviously Washington's in good position for the playoffs, but division's still on the line. Who knows if it's going to be after the Philadelphia game, but I just don't see that big spark from Washington that justifies them being out to 4.5 in this position. I think if Atlanta can run the football a little bit here and can make Washington more one-dimensional by stopping the run, this game is going to come right down to the fourth quarter. It's tough for me to see in Washington gain a lot of margin here, especially with some of the injuries they got going on. If Marshawn Lattimore can't go, that is a big drop down for that secondary. That secondary is not good without him. And maybe he's going to try and go, and he's going to have to leave mid-game, but hamstrings for cornerbacks they're no joke. And I think Atlanta's got enough enough weapons here to make this thing close and potentially win this thing outright, which is what you want from your dog. If you think your dog can win the game outright, grabbing 4.5 is huge.
Pretty wild when we go back and look at the Commanders and what they've done in recent weeks. Yes, they upset the Philadelphia Eagles last week, but it was the Eagles playing without Jalen Hurts for the majority of that game and Washington needing some late heroics to erase a double-digit deficit. We outlined the history in the preview for this game. A week before that, they took care of the Saints, relatively speaking, needed to withstand a Spencer Rattler missed 2-point conversion in the waning seconds, a game where they closed a 7.5-point favorite. And it was the week before that really stands out. They closed a 6-point favorite against the Tennessee Titans, and here we are talking about them laying 4.5 in a lot of spots against the Atlanta Falcons in a game that Atlanta has to have like blood, and yet overwhelming public support, at least early on, backing the Commanders and Jane Daniels. So a little bit of wiggle room with the dog here, and if you want to wait it out, by all means, go for it. But as Billy mentioned, there is plenty of 4.5 out there. From an official grading standpoint, we'll call it +4 in terms of the Bet the Board record keeping, but do shop around. A book that Billy alluded to and a national shop widely available at 4.5 that are more than happy to try and take your action.
One more
All
thing,
right, my
Todd.
friend.
One more thing about this,
Yeah,
and I didn't
away.
even mention it, but like Washington's coming off another just massive emotional win, right? A comeback against their division rival, and it just, they've done this throughout the year, right? They've had these big emotional wins, and it just feels like, yeah, you mentioned it, the number is just, it's just a bit too far for me, man.
And look, Washington still has to try and do a little bit and get a little bit of help to try and officially sew up a playoff berth. But at this point, the path is there for the Commanders to be able to make it happen. But again, winning and winning by margin, two very different things in the NFL, especially against the Falcons side that would love to be able to control its own destiny in the NFC South before what should be an extremely winnable game in the regular season finale, at least on paper. All right, my good man, you did one hell of a job filling in for the big shoes of Payne Insider there, breaking down all of the marquee matchups for the weekend. Anything else you'd like to share with our loyal listeners or pass on before we close up shop and wish them the best of luck with all of their Week 17 investments?
I do not. That's all I got, man. Just great talking ball.
Always fun. We know that the stakes a lot higher this juncture of the season, a number of teams just playing out the stretch, and a boatload of teams also looking to try and play spoiler around here. So I want to say thank you, as always, to our loyal Bet the Board listeners. Appreciate you guys and girls tuning in each and every week throughout the course of the season. Enjoy the final football weekend of calendar year 2024. As I said, we'll be back with you on Monday, not just with a breakdown of the Detroit Lions on the road at the San Francisco 49ers, but a deep dive of all 4 college football playoff quarterfinal games with Payne Insider and Brad Powers. So for Billy, I'm Todd Fuhrman. Best of luck with all of your Week 17 investments, and come Sunday Night Football under the bright lights in the nation's capital with a ticket on the Atlanta Falcons in that portfolio. We'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.